Most Next.js tutorials teaches you to log in with email and password, add a JWT and call it finished. That's not authentication, that is a demo. Real applications need refresh tokens that actually rotate, social login you understand from the first redirect to the last, a password reset flow that doesn't leak who is registered, and routes that are locked down by a custom guard, one that goes on to read the token, verify the token and decide who gets in, built by us from scratch. This is what we are building today. A complete authentication API, email and password registration and login, JWT Access Tokens paired with refresh tokens, Google OAuth, GitHub OAuth, forgot and reset password powered by Resend, and a protected profile route sitting behind a guard you understand line by line. We built Google and GitHub OAuth directly, straight from the authorization code flow, every redirect, every token exchange, every step fully visible and fully yours. Nothing behind a configuration object, nothing that you need to trust blindly. Timestamps for every stage are in the description, so jump straight to wherever you need at any point in time. And drop a comment telling us which front end you would love to see this integrated with, and I'm going to be building that next. Let's go on and understand authentication in Nest.js. I have already created the Nest.js application. If you check the app service, it just returns hello world. And if you send the request to the application, you're just going to get back the basic hello world text as we see over here. You can also inspect the main.ts. I haven't made any change. We're going to make all the changes together. Let's start by installing the different dependencies. So over here in the terminal, I'm going to say npm install. We need to install Drizzle ORM. We're also going to install pg at nestjs/config and also cookie parser. Once the installation is completed, we're going to install the types. We're going to say npm install -d as dev dependency, Drizzle kit. We also need to install the types /pg and also at types /cookie -parser. Again, once this is installed, we are going to install the class validator types. So we're going to say npm install argon2 that we can use for hashing password, class validator, class transformer, and we also need to install Resend for transactional emails. We give this a moment for the installation to complete, and now we have the dependencies. Up next, let's set up the env file. We are going to be creating an env file just at the root of the project here, and the port is going to be 3000. The node env is going to be development. The database URL, we're going to get that in a moment. The front end URL is going to be localhost on port 3001. The access token secret is going to be just anything. And then we have the access token expires in. It's going to expire in 15 minutes. We also have the refresh token secret, which should be anything secure. And the refresh token expires in 7 days. And for the OAuth, we have Google Client ID. No worries, we're going to get this in a moment. Same for the Google Client secret, but the Google callback URL is going to be our API. So port 3000/auth/google/callback. Same for GitHub, the GitHub client ID, the GitHub client secret, and the GitHub callback URL is also going to be our API /auth/github/callback. Once we have this, we are just missing the Resend API key and also the email from, which is going to point to auth tutorial onboarding Resend. This is the domain we need to use, and the password reset URL is going to be the front end /reset password. The next thing is to have our Drizzle configuration. So what is we're going to do, we're going to create this new file in the root of application, and this is going to be the drizzle.config.ts file. We are going to start by importing Drizzle config from drizzle-kit. And then we're going to import everything as .env from .env. The .env needs to be registered here, so the order is important. And then we're going to have a check. If there is no process.env.database URL, then we can go to throw this error that says database URL is not set, because the .env should have loaded this before now. For the actual configuration, we are going to have the schema, which is going to point to this schema.ts file we're going to create in a moment. The output is going to be the Drizzle folder. The dialect is PostgreSQL. The DB credentials is the URL, which we're going to get from the environment variable. We're also going to set options like strict true and verbose to true. Now we can go on to create the actual database schema for the users. And we're going to do this by creating a folder for our database. So right here in the source, you want to have this database folder. And in here, we're going to have the different files. Let's start with the schema.ts file. In the schema.ts file, we're going to be importing pgtable, UUID, varchar, timestamp. All of these will be coming in from Drizzle ORM PG core. To define the actual table for the users, we're going to be exporting constant users, which is going to be equals to pgtable, the table name of users, and for the different columns, we're going to have the ID of type UUID, default random, and is the primary key. We're also going to have the name, which is varchar, and the constraint is going to have a length of 255 and is not going to be null. Same for the email. The email is varchar email, length 255 is not null, but the email should be unique for every user. The password hash is going to be varchar password hash, the same constraint of length 255. You never want to store plain password, so we're going to use password hash. The Google ID is varchar Google ID, the length of 255, and it should be unique. Same for the GitHub ID, varchar GitHub ID, length 255, it should be unique. And for the avatar URL, we're also going to add a constraint, but this time the constraint, let's just give it some more length of 512. We're going to have the refresh token hash, which is the varchar refresh token hash, and the length is going to be 255. Then we're going to have the password reset token hash, which is going to be of type varchar. The table name or the column name is password reset token hash with a length of 255. Then for the password reset token expires at, because you don't want this to be forever, this is going to be of type timestamp. The password reset token expires at, we're going to set the time zone to be true. And then we need the created at and the updated at. This is going to be of type timestamp, created at with time zone true. We're going to give this a default of now, and we're also going to say not null. So this is going to be defaulted. Same for the updated at, it's going to be of type timestamp, updated at with time zone is going to be true. We're going to give it the default now and also not null. Then we need the different types. We're going to have the type for the user and the type for the new user. But first, I'm just going to fix this lint in here. So let's have the type definition. We're going to be exporting the type for the user. And this user type is going to be the type of our users.infer select. Then we will need one more type for the new user. And this is going to be type of users.infer insert. Then we need our database types. So over here in the database folder, we're going to be creating a new file. And that new file is going to be the database.types.ts file. Now in here, we're going to have different types. We're going to be importing PG, Node PG database from Drizzle ORM, Node Postgres. We also need to import everything as schema, which is going to come from the schema file. And next, let's export this type. This type is going to be the Drizzle database type. It's going to be equals to Node PG database based on the type of our schema. And we're also going to export the injection token, which is this Drizzle client equals to the symbol of Drizzle client like this. All that's left is to have our database provider. So right here, still in the database folder, we're going to be creating a database.provider.ts file. Let's go on and bring the imports. We're going to be importing provider. Provider is going to come from NestJS/common. We also need to bring in our config service. The config service is going to come from at NestJS/config. We also need to import pool, and pool is going to be coming in from PG. And then let's import Drizzle. Drizzle is going to be coming in from Drizzle-ORM/node-postgres. We also need to import everything as schema, which is going to come from one level up our schema file. And then we need to bring in a Drizzle client, which also is going to come in from our database types. Now we have the imports. Let's export the constant our database provider. This database provider is going to be of type provider, and it's going to be equals to this provide, which is the Drizzle client. We're also going to inject the config service, and in the use factory function, we can have access to the config service. Here we're going to have the connection string, and we're going to get this from the config service. So we're going to say get or throw, where we expect a string of the database URL. And then we're going to have our pooler. So const pool is going to be equals to this new pool where we pass the connection string. And then we want to go on and return Drizzle. And in Drizzle, we're going to pass the pool and then our schema. So let's close things up. And finally, let's have our database module. So right here in the database folder, we need the module so that we can group everything we've written together. In this database.module.ts file, we are going to be importing global and also module from Next.js common. Global means we are just going to import the database module once in the app module. Then let's import the database provider, which is going to come from one level up our database provider file. We also need our Drizzle client, and the Drizzle client is going to come in from the database.types file. So let's mark this class as global. And then for the @module decorator, we're going to have the providers, which is going to point to our database provider. And for the exports, we're going to have our Drizzle client like this. And we can go on to export the class of database module. We need to register the database module in our app module. But first, in the imports array, let's have our config module. And here in the config module, we're going to call for root. We need to import this from Nest.js config. And then we're going to call for root. And for the configuration, we're going to say this is global. So we're going to set is global to the value of true. And we're also going to set our env file path, which is going to point to the .env file. Now we can go on to register the database module. So over here, we have our database module, which is going to come from database and the database module file. Let's also update the main.ts file with some configuration. So I'm going to come over to the main, and right here, I'm just going to remove everything we have so that we can start blank. So here, let's have our const app, and const app is going to be awaiting the next factory.create based on the application module. The config service is going to be equals to app.get, and we're going to pass the config service. No worries, we're going to import this later. We're also going to say app.use cookie parser so that we can read the cookie from the request headers. And then we're going to say app.use global pipes, the new validation pipe. And for the options, we're going to set whitelist to true. We're also going to say forbid non-whitelisted to true. And we're also going to set transform to true. Now let's close this and let's go on to enable course. We're going to say app.enable course. The origin is going to be the config service. We also want to get or throw the front end URL string if we're not able to find this. The credentials is going to be set to true. Now let's have our port. The port is going to be equal to config service.get. We expect a number port like this, otherwise we'll fall back to 3000. And finally, we can go on to listing on that specific port. We bring in the config service, which is going to come from nestjs/config. The cookie parser is going to come from cookie parser, and the validation pipe is going to come from nest common. Now we have the different imports. We can just go on to make sure our application is starting up. So I'm going to start up the application, and then we validate that our application is up and running. The next thing we are going to do is to make sure we get our database credentials, and to also make sure we get our credentials from Resend, and then we can continue from there. The application is up and running. Let's get our credentials next. Over here in console.neon.tech, we are going to be creating a new project. You want to click over here, and then you're going to give this project a name. And we can go with the name of NestJS Authentication, and then we're going to create this project. Give this a moment, and you're going to have a new project dashboard here, and you can click on this connect button and copy your connection string. Now let's come back to the application, and we want to come over to the .env file so that we can update our database URL. So here, the database URL, where we have the ... over here, we're going to paste in this new value that we just copied from Neon. We're going to come back to the browser so that we can set up our Resend API key. I already have my Resend account over here, so if you do not have one, you would have to create a new Resend account. Over here in Resend for transactional emails, we want to come over to the API keys section. So over here in the API keys section, we're going to be creating a new API key. I'm going to click on this plus button here, and this is going to bring up this modal where we can give this API key a name. And just for this dashboard here, I would also go with the name of NestJS Auth, give it full access and create the key. Make sure you copy this key. This is just view once, as you can see over here. Now back to the application. I'm going to paste in this key here as the value of our Resend API key. So let's give this file a save, and I'm also going to exit or close all these different files that we have opened up over here just to keep things clean. Now we are going to go on and run our database migration. I'll start by coming over to the terminal window, and I'm just going to shut the terminal for now and also clear and open up the Explorer so that we can see the output. The command is npx drizzle kit generate, which is going to generate the migration. And once we have the migration file, we can go on to apply the migration. As you can see over here, we have this Drizzle folder that has this SQL which matches our user SQL. Now we're going to run the command npx drizzle kit migrate, which is then going to apply this migration onto our database URL that we just stored in our .env file. As you can see here, it's currently applying the migration. And once this is done, let's come over to the Neon console. Over here, back to the browser, let's come over to Neon console. And if we come over to this Postgres database dropdown and we click into the tables, you're going to see right here, once it loads up, we're going to have our users table, which has the different columns that we just specified, just as we see over here. What's the next step? The next step, we are going to be creating our user service and everything related to our user. Now we are going to concentrate on the user service. Let's go over there, and right here in the source folder, let's create a new folder for our users. And in here, we're going to create the first file, which is the users.service.ts file. This file is going to have different methods that we're going to make use of later. So let me collapse this and also collapse the terminal. And in here, we can start by importing inject and also injectable. All these will come from at NestJS /common. Then we need to bring in equals. Equals will come in from Drizzle ORM. And after this, we need our Drizzle client. So the Drizzle client is going to come in from our database types. So this is into the database folder, and there we have the database.types file. And after this, we need our Drizzle database type. So we're going to import type Drizzle database, which also is going to come in from database and the database.types file. And then we need our user schema. So let's import users, which is going to come in from our database schema. And now we are also going to import the type user. So remember, this is infer select. This user is coming from our database schema. We want to have this safe user type because we do not want to return all the user credentials, such as the password and stuff like that. So we want to omit from the user the password hash, refresh token hash, password reset token hash, and we also want to omit the password reset token expires at. So we want to make sure we are not sending these credentials over to the client. Let's have the class injectable, and we're going to export the class user service. Now in the constructor, we're going to be injecting the Drizzle client. So here we're going to say at inject Drizzle client's private read-only database is going to be of type Drizzle database. The first method is this find by ID, which takes in the ID and return the promise of type user or undefined. So here we're going to say const user is equals to await this.db.select. We want to select from the users table, and the where clause is where equals the user.id matches the ID this function receives, and want to limit this by 1. And finally, we can go on to return the user. The next method is to find a user by email. So here we're going to have async find by email, which takes in the user email of type string and is going to return promise user or undefined. And here we're also going to do the same. So await this.db.select from the users table where equals the users.email matches the email this find by email method receives. We want to limit the response or result by 1, and then we can go on to return the user. We're also going to have the find by Google ID. So async find by Google ID is going to take in the Google ID of type string. So this is for our OAuth, and it's going to return either the user or undefined promise. So const user is equals to await this.db.select. We're going to select everything from the users table where equals the user.googleid matches the Google ID this function or method receives. We limit the response by 1 and want to return the user. The next one is find by GitHub ID. This also is going to receive the GitHub ID of type string and is going to return a promise which resolves the user or undefined. So const user is equals to await this.db.select. We want to select from the users table where equals the user.github ID matches the GitHub ID this function receives. We want to limit the result by 1, and then we can go on to return the user. Then we have the create with password. So this is for the local email and password authentication. So the data is this object with the name of type string. Also the email is of type string, and then the password hash. So whenever a user is creating an account, this is the data we expect. The password hash is also of type string, and this is going to return a promise that resolves to a user. So const user is equals to await this.db.insert into the users table these values. The values are going to be the name, which is data.name. Also the email is data.email, and the password hash is going to be equals to data.password hash. And then we're going to chain dot returning so that we can get the resource that was created, which is the user. And then we can go on to return the user. We also need the next one to create OAuth user. So async create OAuth user needs the data. The data is the email, the name of string, also the email, which is of type string. We also need the avatar URL, which is optional string like this. And then the Google ID, which also optional string because either the user is creating with Google or GitHub. So the GitHub ID is also of type string. And finally, this is going to return a promise that resolves to a user. So const user is equals to await this.db. Want to insert into the users table the values, and the values, the name is going to be data.name. Also the email is going to be data.email. We also have the avatar URL, which is data.avatar URL. We have the Google ID, which is equals to data.google ID, as well as the GitHub ID, which is equals to data.github ID, and then want to chain dot returning just like this. And finally, we can go on to return the user. So the next one is to link the Google ID. So we're going to have async link Google ID. We need the user ID and the Google ID of type string, and we're going to return a promise void, and we're going to just await this.db.update the users, and want to set the Google ID and also the updated at to be a new date like this, and the where clause is where the users.id matches the user ID this method receives, and we're going to close this up. Still the same for link GitHub ID. We get the user ID, we get the GitHub ID, and return a promise that resolves to void. Then we can go on to await this.db.update, maybe update the users table. This time around, we're going to set the GitHub ID to match the GitHub ID, and the updated at is going to be a new date, and the where clause is going to be where equals the user.id matches the user ID. We're also going to have this async update refresh token hash. So we need the user ID of type string, and we also need a refresh token hash, which also is of type string, and we're going to return a promise that resolves to void. Then we await this.db.update. We update the users table, and we want to set, and we're setting the refresh token hash to match this one here, and the updated that is going to be a new date, and the where clause is where users.id matches the user ID, and then we can close this up. The next one is to clear the refresh token hash. This is going to be for a specific user, so we need the user ID, and it's also going to return promise void. Then we can go on to await this.db.update the users table. We want to set the refresh token hash to null. We're also going to set the updated at to be this new date like this, and this is going to be for this specific user where equals the user.id matches the user ID. Then we also want to have the set reset password token, and this is going to take in the user ID of type string. It's also going to take in the password token or password reset token hash of type string, and also the reset password reset token expires at of type date. And then it returns a promise that resolves to void. Finally, we're going to await this.db.update users. We want to set the password reset token hash to match this that this method receives, and that's the same for the password reset token expires at. And finally, the new date is just going to be, or the updated at is just going to be a new date, and this is going to be for where equals the user.id matches that user ID. Then we have the reset password. To reset a password, we need the user ID and we need the password hash. Both are of type string and we're going to return a promise that resolves to void. We await this.db.update the users table. We want to make sure we are setting the password hash to match this password hash and also the password reset token hash. We're going to reset this to null. We're also going to reset the password reset token expires at to null because we are resetting password. And we're also going to refresh token hash. We're going to set that to null. And the updated at is going to be equals to a new date. And the where clause is where equals the users.id matches this user ID. Finally, we're going to have to save user, which is going to take in the user object and it's just going to return save user. So we're only going to return the user ID, which is users.id. Same for the name, users.name. The email is going to be user.email. The Google ID is going to be user.googleid. Same for the GitHub ID, user.github ID. The avatar URL is going to be the user.avatar URL. And then we also need the created at, which is the user.created at, and the updated at, which is user.updated at. So we do not want to return the entire user object. Once you have the service created, the next step is for us to create the user module so that we can have the service linked over there. Now let's do that. Over here, I'm going to be creating this new file, which is the users.module.ts file. In here, we're going to be importing module, which will come from Nest.js common, and then we're going to bring in the user service that we just created. So let's import the user service, and this is just going to come from one level up as they are in both the same folder, the users.service file. And the at module decorator, the providers, is going to be pointing into the user service, and then we're also going to be exporting the user service just like this. And now we can have the class definition. We export the class users module. We need to register the user module right into the application module. So give this file a save, and then you can come over to the app module, and just after the database module, we can register the users module there and make sure you import the users module. Let's test our application. You always want to make sure you run your application to make sure your application compiles. So I'm going to clear the terminal and I'm also going to run the start dev command. Now, as we can see, our application is back up and running. The next thing we're going to be working on is to have the users controller so that we can call all these methods we just created in the user service. Now we're going to be working on the email and password authentication. The first thing we need to do is to install this package. We didn't install it earlier. So I'll close all these tabs and stop the dev server for now. And I'm going to run the command npm install at NestJS JWT. So we need to also install this package or this library. We're going to wait for this to install and then we're going to go into the authentication flow. Now the installation is completed. I'm going to collapse all of these, and in the source folder, we create a new folder for auth. And here we're going to start with the types. So let's create another folder, types, and here we're going to have our JWT payload type.ts, just like this. So JWT-payload.type.ts. This is going to be the JWT type interface. So let's export the type JWT payload. It's going to be this object. The sub is the user ID. It stands for subject, which is standard JWT payload. We're also going to have the user email, which is of type string. Now that we have this, the next step is to create our different DTOs, data transfer objects. So in the auth folder, we're going to create a DTO folder so we can define the contract for what we need for registration. Let's start with the register.dto.ts file. And inside this file, we're going to bring in the imports. Let's import is string, is email, and the minimum length. All of these will come from class validator because we want to apply validation to our DTOs. We're going to export the class the register DTO, and in this class we're going to have a string and at min length for the name. The name is going to be of type string and is required. That's why we have the bank operator there. Same for the email, is email, and the email is going to be of type string. And last we have the password, but for the minimum length, let's go with a min length of 8, and we have the password, which is also a required string, just like this. Now I have this error over here. You can ignore this error. It's just VS Code playing with me for now. So it's a false alarm. Let's continue. we're going to create the next file, which is the login dto.ts file. The same way, we're going to be importing is email, is string from class validator. Then we can go on to export the class, the login DTO. In the login DTO, we just need the email and the password. So we say is email, and the email is going to be of type string, and also is string just for the password, which also is going to be of type string. Just like this. Now, the error persists over here, but what I'm going to do to fix this, I'm just going to quickly refresh Visual Studio Code. So Shift Command P, reload window, and once it reloads, you're going to see how the error is going to go because it's just a false alarm for me and the errors are gone. Let's create the authentication service next. Now, the service is where we're going to, discuss with our database and authenticate the user. So we have the auth.service.ts file. I'm going to collapse the Explorer. You always want your service to be having all the business logic or to have all the business logic. So we're going to bring in the conflict exception, injectable, and unauthorized exception. So these imports will come from @nestjs/common. We're also going to bring in the config service, which will come also from @nestjs/config. Then we need the JWT service import. The JWT service will come from @nestjs/JWT. We just installed this library. Next, we need to bring in the type, the JWT sign options from @nestjs/JWT. Then let's import everything as argon2, which is going to come from argon2 so that we can hash passwords. Then we're going to import the type of, not the type, we bring in the user service and also the safe user from the user service file that we created. And then we're going to import the type of JWT payload, which is going to come from the types. And then we have the JWT payload.type file. We're also going to import the type, the register DTO. Remember our DTO. So this is going to come from the DTO folder. And then we have the register DTO. Same for the login DTO. So we're importing the type login DTO from the DTO and the login.dto file. Let's have our authentication result. We're exporting the type auth result. It's going to be equals to user, which is of type safe user, so we do not leak user credentials. The access token is going to be a string, and the refresh token is going to be a string. So whenever a user authenticates, this is what the response is going to look like. We're going to mark the class as injectable, and then we can go on to export the class authentication service. We're going to have the constructor so we can inject private read-only the user service, which is going to be of type user service. Same for the JWT service, so private read-only JWT service, which is of type JWT service. And finally, we have private read-only config service is of type config service. We're going to have some private methods. The first one is this normalized email, which is going to take in the user email of type string and return a string. We just want to return the email.stream to lowercase, and that's about it over here. Then we're going to have more. Private generate access token. This helper is going to help us generate the access token. So we need the payload of type JWT payload, and it's going to return a promise string. Then we can go on to return this JWT service.sign async. We pass the payload, and the configuration secret is going to be this.config service. We want to get or throw the string with respect to the access token secret. The expires in, we're also going to get this from the config service. So we're going to get or throw, we expect a string, and we're going to pass the JWT expires in. Now we're going to cast this type over here. So we're going to say this as JWT sign-in options expires in, just like this. And then we can go to close this up. Next, we're going to have private generate refresh token method. It also needs the payload of type JWT payload, and it's going to return the promise string. Then we can return this.jwt service.sign async payload. We're going to get or pass the configuration secret, which is this.config service.get or throw we expect a string refresh token secret. For the expires in, we're also going to say this.config service.get or throw we expect a string, and we're going to pass in the refresh token expires in. And then we're going to say as the JWT sign options, just like this, expires in. Then let's go on to have the issue tokens. Private async issue tokens is going to take in the payload of type JWT payload. it's going to return a promise, which is this object. So the access token string and also the refresh token string, because the idea is for this method to issue the different tokens. So what we're going to do, we're going to make use of promise.all. We're going to destructure access token and refresh token equals to await promise.all. And this is going to take the this.generate access token. We pass in the payload. And then we're also going to do the same for this.generate refresh token. And we're going to pass in the payload. Finally, we can return the object of access token and refresh token. Now we're going to get into the gist of the service. The first one is to register. So async register is going to take in the DTO of type register DTO, and we need to return our authentication result promise. So for the email, we want to call this.normalize email so we can pass in the email. And let's first check if we have an existing user. So const existing user, we're going to call the user service, and there we have the find by email method, and we're going to pass in the user email. If we do have an existing user that is trying to register, we're going to go on and throw a new conflict exception and say an account with this email already exists. And after we do this, let's then go on to hash the user password, because now we are sure this user is not in our system. So we have the password hash, we await agon2.hash, and we pass the dto.password. Next, we can go on to create user with password. So we have the user equals to await this.userService, and we call the create with password, and then we can pass in the name, which is the dto.name, same with the email, and then the password hash. As you can see, we are not passing the user password over here. We are storing the password hash. Let's have this payload so we can issue the tokens. The payload is going to be the sub and the email just of type JWT payload. And next, we're going to then call or destructure the access token and the refresh token, which is going to be a result of awaiting this.issue tokens and passing the payload. Then let's also have the refresh token hash. The refresh token hash is equals to await agon2.hash, and we're going to pass in the refresh token. We can go on to await this.userService, so we can go on to update the refresh token hash for this specific user, and then we also pass in the refresh token hash like this. Now, this is all we need to register. Finally, we return the result, which is this object with the user, this.userService. We want to call to save user and pass the user. You don't want to leak user's credentials. We also pass in the access token and the refresh token. No worries, we're going to test this in a moment. Now let's have the login. For the login, we pass in the DTO, which is of type the login DTO, and we also return the auth result promise. We're going to normalize the email. So const email is equals to this.normalize email, and we pass in the DTO.email. Let's find the user by email. Const user is going to be equals to await this.userService.find by email, and we're going to pass in the user email. If for some reason we do not have the user, or the user doesn't have a password hash, we want to go and throw a new unauthorized exception. And we're going to say invalid email or password. You don't want to tell the user which of them is invalid. And after this, let's then check if the password is valid. So const is password valid is going to be equals to await agon2. And we're going to use agon2.verify. We're going to pass in the user.password hash so that it can compare the dto.password just like this. And if this is false, so if password is not valid, then we're going to throw a new unauthorized exception, and we're also going to pass in generic message that says invalid email or password. We do not want to tell the user or give the user a hint. Let's have the payload. So const payload, which is of type JWT payload, is then going to be equals to this object where we have the sub for the user ID and the email, which is the user email. Now, as before, we're going to destructure the access token and the refresh token by awaiting this.issue tokens and then passing in the payload. Let's go on to have the token refresh hash. So const refresh token hash is going to be equals to await agon2.hash, and then we're going to pass in the refresh token. Then let's go on to await this.userService.update refresh token hash, and we're going to pass in the user ID and also the refresh token hash like this. And finally, we can go on to return this object, which has the user. Then we're going to call this.userService to save user and pass in the user. We're also going to return the access token as well as the refresh token. All right. So this is the user service definition here. I'm just going to close all of these. Okay, so just give this file a save. And once you're confident you understand everything that happens here, we can then proceed to the authentication controller. I'm going to give this file a save and create the next file, and this is going to be the auth.controller.ts file. And here we're going to import the body, and we're also going to import controller, HTTP code. We're also going to import HTTP status and post from @nestjs/common. Let's also bring in our authentication service and our auth results. Both of these will just come in from the authentication service file. We also need to have the register DTO and the login DTO. So we're going to import register DTO, which will come from the DTO and the register.dto file. We can also import the login DTO, which is going to come from the DTO folder, and then we have the login.dto file. So request coming to application, so /auth is going to be handled by this auth controller route handler. In the constructor, we're going to be injecting the authentication service. So private read-only auth service is going to be of type auth service like this. Let's have the post request. So /auth/register, and the HTTP code is going to be HTTP status.created, which is 201. And the register is going to take the body. So we're going to have the DTO, and then we're going to return the auth results. We can just call this .auth service.register and then pass in the DTO just like this. Finally, we're also going to have the same for login, and the HTTP code is the HTTP status.ok, which is 200, and the async login is going to have the DTO, which is of type login DTO, and it's also going to return the authentication result. We can call the auth service and login method and just pass in the DTO. So let's close this up, and this is the auth controller. We have two methods, the register and the login method. We're going to create the auth.module.ts file so that we can group everything together. In here, we're going to import module. Module is going to come from @nestjs/common. We're also going to bring in the JWT module, which is going to come from @nestjs/JWT. We also need our users module. So let's import the users module, which is going to come from users and users module. In the users module, we are exporting this in the module. That's why we can import it here. We also have the auth controller, which is going to come from the auth.controller file. And finally, we are going to be importing the authentication service, which is going to come in from the auth.service file. In the module decorator, we're going to register two imports. The first import is the users module, and we're also going to register the JWT module. We'll call .register and not pass in any configuration. For the controller, we're going to register the auth controller, and for the providers, we're going to register the auth service here. And finally, we can export the class auth module. Now we know the only thing left is for us to register the auth module in the application module. So after the user module, let's go and register the auth module. I'm going to give this file a save, and let's go on to make sure our application is up and running. I'm going to clear the terminal and then run the start dev command. And once we verify our application is up and running, we can then go on to test out the different routes that we have. So we now have the register route and the login route. We are going to be testing these two endpoints next. Let's test out the authentication feature we have worked on. I'm going to close all these tabs that we have open, just leaving the auth controller. Here we have the register endpoint and the login endpoint. I have Postman opened up over here, and I'm going to be creating a new request. Let's go and test out the login flow and then the register flow. So the endpoint is HTTP and then localhost on port 3000/auth and then /login. And the next thing we're going to set is the request body. So you want to choose row over here, and then you want to select JSON. Okay. So now the request body is going to have the email and the password. So for the email, I'm going to go with the email of test@test.com. And then for the password, I'm just going to go with the password of 1 to 6, just like this, to test things out. Now the request type is a post request and not a get request. So now let's go on and send this. Immediately we do, definitely we're going to get an error that's invalid email or password, just as we see like this. Okay, so now we are sure that login is working for unauthenticated users or user that has not registered. I'm going to copy this, and then we're going to test a post request to /register route. So let's update the login to be /register. And the request body, I'm going to choose row and then JSON so that we can copy the this body that we have over here. And then I'm going to come back to register route and then I'll paste this in here. Let's come back to the IDE. Over here, if we go into the register DTO, you would see that to register, you need the name, the email, and the password. So over here in Postman, we need to add a new field, which is going to represent the username. For the name, I'm just going to go with code with lari like this. All right. So now is the time for us to go and test things out. I'm going to send this request, and you can see the password needs to be up to 8 characters. So our DTO is validating. Now I'm going to send this again, and this time around, you're going to see the user object here, which is having this safe user. We do not have any password. We're not exposing any credentials that is valid like that. The client, we just have the user, email, the ID, and all of these. If we send this again, we're going to get conflict because this user already exists. So we get conflict 409, an account with this email already exists. Let's try to log in now. So let's update the password. The password should be 1 to 8 characters. So I'm going to update this 1 to 8 like this. And now this is updated. We send this, we should get the same response. So here you see, we have the user object and we also have the request token, the access token, and the refresh token. Speaking about refresh tokens, let's go on and work on the refresh token implementation. We are going to implement the refresh token functionality. So let's close all these tabs and we're going to continue in the DTO. We need to create a new file, which is going to be the refresh token DTO file. So this is what the user would pass whenever they want to refresh a token. Let's go on and bring in is string. A string is going to come in from class validator because the user needs to give us the refresh token, right? So we're going to be exporting the class, and we can call this class the refresh token DTO, which we're going to mark as a string, and we need the refresh token, which is of type string. Now we have the DTO, we're going to make use of this in the service where we can write the actual function or the method that will refresh the user token. Over here in the auth service, so maybe we can scroll further down after the login method so that we can register a new refresh method. So here we're going to have this async refresh method. It's going to take in the DTO, so the refresh token DTO, and it's going to return the auth result promise. Let's have the let payload here, which is of type the JWT payload, and in the try block, we want to verify this token that the user is sending to us. So the payload is going to be await this.jwt service.verify async. We're going to expect the JWT payload, and we're passing the refresh token we get from the DTO. And then we want to have the secret. The secret is going to come from the config service. So we're going to get or throw the string of refresh token secret. So with this secret, it knows how to sign and also how to verify. So let's close all of these, and in the catch block, if this verification fails, then we know that this is a wrong token or expired token. So we're going to throw a new unauthorized exception. This is an invalid or expired refresh token, just like this. Now when we continue, we know the payload has been populated. So we're going to have the user, which is going to be await this.user service, and we can find the user by ID because of the payload sub. Then let's check if we do not have a user, or the user doesn't have this refresh token hash, then we can throw a new unauthorized exception that this also is an invalid or expired token. We're going to test this scenario in a moment. So let's check if the refresh token is valid. So const is refresh token valid. We're going to make use of argon2.verify, where we pass in the user refresh token hash to compare it against the DTO.refresh token. So this is going to give us true or false boolean. If this is not a valid refresh token, we're going to throw a new unauthorized exception. This also is invalid or expired refresh token. Alright, so now with all the security check out of the way, let's go and construct a new payload. So const new payload is equals to this object where we're going to have the sub, which is the user ID, and the email is going to be user email. We need to issue new tokens to the user. So const the access token, refresh token, we destructure all of these by awaiting this.issue tokens, which needs the new payload. And let's also go on to have the token or the refresh token hash. So we're going to await argon2.hash the refresh token. If this gets compromised, they will just see the hash value and not the real access token. Then we're going to return or call the user service so that we can update the refresh token hash. We pass the user ID and the actual refresh token hash. And finally, we can go on to return to the client, the user, which we're also going to call the user service to save user. And we pass in the user. Then we're also going to pass in the access token and the refresh token. Okay, so this is the service. We need to call this service in the controller, right? First, let's bring in the imports. Okay, so here let's import the refresh token DTO, and then I'm just going to fix any linting errors that we have before we go over to the controller. Okay, so this is our authentication service. We are going to come over to the auth controller so that we can register the refresh token endpoint. That also is going to be just after login here. We're going to have a post request. So /auth/refresh is going to come to this route handler. The HTTP code is going to be HTTP status.ok, which is 200. And async refresh, we're going to get the DTO, making use of the @body decorator. And we're going to return the auth result promise. And then we are going to return this.auth service.refresh DTO. Alright, so this is the auth controller. We have registered a new endpoint. Make sure you bring in the imports, and now we are going to test this. Okay, so let's head over to Postman, and over here in Postman, we are going to try this out. But first, I want to copy this refresh token because we need to pass the refresh token right before we can go on to refresh the token. So make sure you copy that, and let's have a new request over here. The endpoint is /auth/refresh, just as we saw not quite long. This also is going to be a post request, and it needs the body. So let's update the request body. I'm going to hit on raw, and I will select JSON, and we know it just needs the actual refresh token over here. So here we're going to have the refresh token, but now I'm just going to pass a wrong refresh token so that we can test out the scenario where we have a wrong token. So I'm just going to pass in the value of wrong, and then once you give this a send, you're going to see this is an invalid or expired token. So this is working as expected. Watch what happens when we go on to pass the actual refresh token this time around. And if you go on to send this request, then you're going to see the application is going to refresh the user token, as you can see over here. So we get the auth response type back with the access token and the refresh token. This is working fine. What if we send this again with the previous refresh token that we tried? What happens? Now you're going to see this has been invalidated. We now have an invalid or expired refresh token. So the way for us to get the refresh token to test with is to log in the user again. So we're going to log in, and once we authenticate, then we have new credentials for the access for the refresh token. I'm going to copy this, and let's go again. Okay, so now we just replace this here just like this, and if we give this a send, you're going to see everything works as expected. This is working on fine, and this is working as expected. Now we're going to go over to the next phase of building our application, which is for us to understand how we can go on to protect routes. Let's work on this next. Now we are going to be working on our own custom route protection. I'm actually excited about this. Let's close all these tabs, and we're going to start in the authentication. We want to register a new type. This type is the authenticated request type. And this is just for us to inject the user in the request payload from Express, because by default, we do not have the user. So we're going to be importing the type of request that will come from Express. And we're also going to be bringing in the JWT payload. So let's import the type JWT payload, which will come from our JWT payload type. We are just going to go on and export this type of authenticated user, which is going to be equals to the request from Express, but we are also going to add the user, which is the JWT payload. By default, Express doesn't ship with a user object in the request payload. So now we have this, we are going to create our own guard. This is the access token guard we are going to be creating. And that's where this type is going to come in handy. So in this guards folder, we are going to create a new file, and this is the access-token.guard.ts file. So once you have this file created, we can start with the imports. We are going to be importing canActivate. We also need to bring in the execution context, and we're also going to bring in injectable and unauthorized exception. All of these will come in from at NestJS/common. Then we need to bring in our configuration service, which is going to come from at NestJS/config. We also need our JWT service. The JWT service is going to come from at NestJS/JWT. We also need to bring in the type of request, which is going to come in from Express, as well as bringing in our JWT payload. The type JWT payload is going to come from the types folder, and there we have the JWT payload, the type file. And finally, we're going to be importing the type of authenticated request, which is going to come from types authenticated request type like this. So over here, we're going to have this access token guard. So let's export the class access token guard, but it has to implement canActivate. We're going to see the use for this canActivate. And in constructor, let's inject the JWT service, which is going to be of type JWT service. And then we're also going to say private read-only config service is going to be of type config service. Because we have this canActivate, we must have the canActivate method, and we're going to get the context, which is of type execution context, and we're going to return a boolean promise. So first we're going to get the request, and then we call the context.switch to http.getRequest, and we expect this request type. Remember, the user is already in the request object. So the token is going to be this method we do not have yet, extra token from header, and we're going to pass in the request. If we are not able to retrieve the token with this helper, then we're going to throw this new unauthenticated request that we are missing the access token. We're going to test this in a moment. Let's about try catch block. In the try block, we're going to have the payload, and the payload is going to be awaiting this.jwt service, and we call the verify async method. We pass in the JWT payload, the token, and the configuration. So for the secret, we say this.config service.get or throw, where we expect a string of access token secret. Then we're going to close this up, and you're going to see over here, this request as authenticated user.user is then going to be equals to payload. So you can see we are injecting the payload as the request user object. Now for the catch block, we're just going to throw a new unauthorized exception, invalid or missing access token. Now this line 33 is so important because everything we are doing actually depends on that line over there. And finally, we can go on to return true. So let's have the private extract token from header method. It's going to take in the request of type request, and it's going to return string or undefined. We're just going to say auth header is going to be request.headers.authorization. So remember authorization bearer token. Now we are going to check if we do not have any auth header, then we can return undefined, just like this. Now, but if we do have the auth header, then let's destructure the type and the token. And this is going to be equal to the auth header.split by this space over here. So remember that we are going to return the type if it's equals to bearer, we're going to return the actual token. Otherwise, we are going to return undefined. So as I said earlier, this piece of code we have over here is so important. So make sure you have this exact code like this, where you have the request as authenticated user.user, then it's equals to the payload. So this is so important. Now let's have the decorator. This decorator is going to retrieve the user from the actual request. Let's see how it works. We're going to have the decorator folder, and then we're going to create a current-user.decorator.ts file. Okay, so in here, let's have the definition. We're going to be importing the create param decorator because decorators are functions. We're also going to bring in the execution context from at NestJS/common. Then we're going to be importing the type of JWT payload, which is going to come in from our types. And then we have the JWT payload type. and we need to bring in our authenticated request, which is going to come from the types, and there we have the authenticated request type. So finally, let's create our own decorator. We are going to be exporting this constant current user. This is going to be equal to create param decorator because we are creating our own param decorator. We have access to the data, which is of unknown, but the context is important here, is of type execution context. And in here, we're going to first have the request from the context. So we say cts.switch to http.getRequest. We expect to get the authenticated request back. Now we know that this authenticated request has the user object. So we're going to return request.user, which was injected in our guard. Okay, so now you get the idea of how things are connected. We are going to be creating the service file so that we can have different methods like register, login. So what we're going to do is over here, just after the refresh, we're going to add the logout and the get profile method. Let's start with the logout. So we say async logout is going to have the user ID of type string, and it's going to return this object with success true promise, just like this. We're going to await this.userService.clear refresh token, and we're passing the user ID. And finally, we can go on to return this object with success property, and the value is true. No worries, I'm going to fix the formatting once we are done. And next is this get profile. We need the user ID, and it's going to return the safe user promise. So in here, we're going to get user. So const user is awaiting this.userService.find by ID. And if for some reason we're not able to get a user by ID, then we're going to throw an unauthorized exception, which is going to say user no longer exists. So just something like this. And finally, we can go on to return the this.userService.toSaveUser, and we're going to pass the user. Okay, so definitely we have linting errors, which I'm just going to fix in this service, just like this. And once we are done with this, we can now proceed to the authentication controller so that we can have the logout and also the me to get the profile. So in the auth controller, so maybe somewhere after this refresh, we're going to have the post to log out, and we're going to make use of the guards, which is the access token guard. The HTTP code is going to be the HTTP status.ok, and the async logout method, we're going to have the current user decorator, which gives us the user here of type JWT payload, and it's going to return success true just because we are logging out. We're going to return this.auth service.logout, and we're passing the user.sub, which is the user.id. Next is the me endpoint. So we're going to make use of the guard, the JWT authentication guard, and the async, the HTTP code is HTTP status.ok, and async get profile. We are retrieving the current user from the request, and we're expecting a promise of safe user. And we can just await or return this.auth service.get profile, where we're passing the user ID. Alright, definitely we have a bunch of errors because we are missing the imports. So I'm just going to bring in use guards. I'm also going to bring in the access token guard. Also our current user decorator, which is going to retrieve and store the value in the user object. We also bring in a JWT payload. I'm going to fix the linting that we have over here. I thought we brought in the JWT payload. Alright, so I think we just need to have the type annotation. So I'm going to say use import type. And they're also going to bring in the safe user from our user, and also the get decorator, which is going to come from Nest.js /common. This is our authentication controller. We need to register it in the auth module. So over here, just after providers, we are going to actually register the access token guard over here. Let's make sure we import it like this. Alright, so once you're done, make sure your application is up and running. And the next step is for us to test the different endpoints that we just registered right into the authentication controller. So we're going to be testing these two endpoints next. The me endpoint for the user profile and also the logout endpoint. Okay, so let's come over to Postman. And here in Postman, I'm going to start by logging into the application just so that we can get new access token and refresh token. I want to show us something. I want to show us the guard that we have over here. You can see that this is being protected by the access token guard that we created, okay? And if you come right into the access token guard, which is this file over here, you can see here we are extracting the token from the header. And if you come over here to this extract token from header, you can see here we are getting the authorization, and this is the bearer token. Okay, I know why I'm pointing this out. This is going to be useful because we need to set the type to be bearer token. So back here in Postman, I think I did send it before. I'm just going to send this again, and we're going to have this access token. So let's go and copy this access token. I think it's better to test with the access token rather than the refresh token. And we're going to be creating a new endpoint here, which is /auth, and this is going to be /me. Let's start up with the me endpoint. This is a GET request, and it doesn't need any request body, but definitely it needs the authorization bearer token. So if we send this straight up, we see we have missing access token unauthorized. Now let's go on to add the bearer token, and I think this was automatically injected, so I'm just going to remove it and add something. So something wrong. And now if we send this, we're no longer going to see missing. We're now saying invalid or expired access token. Now let's get my user profile. I'm going to replace this with this over here, and then I'm going to send this up. So wait a moment for this, and now you can see this is working as expected because we are able to retrieve my profile making use of my access token. Let's go over to the logout endpoint. So logout is pretty much straightforward. This is going to be /auth/logout, and logout is a post request, and the authorization, it needs a bearer token, which I'm just going to set to any random string for now. And once you send this, invalid or expired. But once you replace this with the actual value, then the authentication or logging out should work. So we give this a moment, and you can see we now have success true. This is going to lead us to implementing the Google authentication next. Hello everyone, we are going to be implementing our Google authentication passport. So we're going to implement the full Google OAuth. You can close all the tabs that you have open, and we're going to start with the Google authentication service file. So this is also inside the auth. We are going to create this new Google-auth.service.ts file so we can have the different methods registered here. Let's start by bringing in all the imports that we need. So we're going to be importing injectable from @NestJS/common. We're also going to be importing the config service, which is going to come from @NestJS/config. We also need to bring in random bytes. Random byte is going to be imported from Node Crypto. This is going to help us to generate the state. Next, let's have this type of Google profile. So this is the type we expect. We have the Google ID, which is a string. We also have the email, which is a string, and the name. The name is a string, and also the avatar URL. But this avatar URL is optional, and this is a string if it's available. So let's have the Google token response. This type of Google token response is this object where we have the access token, which also is optional, and it's going to be of type string. We also have another type, which is a Google user information response, because we're going to fetch the user profile. So we have the sub, which is the ID of type string. We also have the email optional, which is of type string. The name also is optional, which is of type string, and the picture is optional string like this. Let's mark the class as injectable, and we are going to then export the class Google Auth service. In the constructor, we're going to be injecting the config service because we need to make use of this. So this is going to be of type config service, and we're going to have this generate state method, and this is going to return a string. So we're going to return the random bytes 32 to string hex over here. Next, we're going to have the get authorization URL, which is going to need the state, and it's going to return a string. So this client ID, we are going to get it from the config service. We haven't gotten this yet from the Google Cloud ID or Google Cloud. So we're going to get or throw the Google client ID. And same for the Google callback. So this is the callback URL. And then we're going to get this from the config service, which is going to be the Google callback URL. Now the params that we're going to send over to Google, let's construct it. So const params is equals to URL search params. And here we're going to have the client ID, which is going to point to the client ID. And also the redirect URI is going to come back or be the callback URL. The response type is going to be code. The scope we need to access from the user is the open ID, email, and the profile. The state, we also have the access type, which is going to be offline, and the prompt is going to be consent. And finally, we're going to return the URL. So the URL is Google v2 URL. So this is https accounts.google.com/o/oauth2/v2. And for auth, we are going to have the params to string. So we're injecting the params here. We also have this exchange code for access token, which is going to need a code of type string and is going to return a promise that resolves to a string. So the client ID, we're also going to get this from the config service. So this config service.get or throw, we expect a string from the Google client ID and also the client secret. We're going to be retrieving this from the config service. So we're going to get or throw, we expect a string, and the key is a Google client secret. And the same for the callback URL. So we're going to say the same thing, const callback URL is equals to this.config service dot get or throw, we expect a string, and we're going to pass the Google callback URL. So let's go on to have our response, because we're going to make use of fetch, native fetch. So response is awaiting fetch, which is going to go over to https oauth2.googleapis.com/token. The method is going to be a post request for the headers. We're going to have the content type header, which is application/www form URL encoded. And then for the body, because the post request, we're going to have the new URL search params. So we're going to pass in the code, also the client underscore ID, which is the client ID. We also have the client underscore secret, which is the client secret. We have the redirect underscore URI, which is the callback URL. And we also have the grant type. This grant type is equals to authorization code like this. Now, if for some reason the response is not okay, we are going to throw a new error that this failed to exchange the Google authorization code, because the idea for this method is to exchange the code that we get for access token. But if it's okay, then we're going to go on and transform the response. So we're going to say const data is going to be equals to await response.json as Google token response. So this is kind of response we expect to get back. If there is no data or access token in the data, then we're going to throw this new error that the Google token response is missing the access token. And finally, we can go on to return the data.access token. So finally, we have successfully exchanged the code for the access token. Now we can go on to fetch the user profile. So async fetch profile, we're going to need this Google access token, which is of type string, and we're going to return the promise of the Google profile. Now the URL is awaiting fetch, and the URL is the https googleapis.com/oauth2 and the version 3/user-info. For the headers, we now need to have the bearer and the Google access token. So this access token needs to be part of the headers, just like this. Then we're going to check if the response for some reason is not okay. So if we're not able to get the user profile, then we're going to throw a new error that says failed to fetch Google profile, just like this. But then let's go and transform the data. So const data is equals to await response.json as a Google user information response. You remember the type we constructed right up. So if there's no data.email, we are going to throw a new error. This new error is the Google profile did not return an email address. And finally, we now have the profile at this point. We're going to return this object here, which is going to have the Google ID, which points to data.sub. The email is the data.email. The name is the data.name, or we can fall back to the data email. And the avatar URL is going to be the data.picture. All right, so this is our Google Authentication service. We need to have the login with OAuth profile next, which is going to be in the authentication service. So this is everything we have. You can inspect it, and once you feel confident and comfortable, you understand what's actually going on, then you can follow up with the auth service so that we can have the login method. So over here in the auth service, I'm going to be implementing this just after the getProfile method here. We're going to have the login with OAuth profile. The formatting can be a little bit tricky, but I'm going to be updating this. So let's go on and have the async login with OAuth profile, which is going to take in the profile object. So the email of type string, we also have the name of type string, the optional avatar URL, which is of type string. We also have the Google ID, because it could be Google or it could be GitHub, right? So the Google ID is going to be of type string, and GitHub ID is going to be of type string. So we're going to return the promise that resolves to auth result. First, we're going to normalize the user email by calling this.normalize email the profile.email. And then let's check. So let user equals to profile.google ID. Then we're going to await this.userService.find by Google ID. And we're going to pass in the profile.google ID. Otherwise, we'll just pass undefined for now. And check if there is no user and there's no user.github ID, then the user is going to be await this.userService.find by GitHub ID, and we're going to pass the profile.github ID just like this. And if still there's no user here, and the user is then going to be equals to await this.userService.find by email, and we're going to pass in the email. And we're also going to check if there is still no user here, then we're going to say user is awaiting this.userService. We can then go on to create OAuth user. And we're going to pass in the name, which is the profile.name, the email. We're also going to pass in the avatar URL, which is the profile avatar URL that this function is receiving. The Google ID is going to be profile.google ID, and the GitHub ID is going to be profile.github ID. Now, otherwise, we are going to be having this else block here. We're going to check if profile.google ID and there is no user.google ID, then we want to link the Google ID. So we're going to call the user service.link Google ID with the user ID and the profile.google ID. And let's do the same check for GitHub. If the profile.github ID and also there is no user.github ID, let's await the user service.link GitHub ID, where we're going to pass in the user ID and also the profile.github ID. Then we're going to construct the payload. The payload is going to be of type the JWT payload, and it's going to be equals to the sub, which is the user.id. The email is the user.email. And then we're going to issue the token. So const access token, refresh token is going to await this.issue tokens based off this payload. And the refresh token hash is going to be equals to awaiting argon2. And we're going to call .hash, where we are going to pass in the refresh token. And finally, we can go on to update the refresh token hash. So we're going to call the user service.update refresh token hash for this specific user, and we're going to pass in the refresh token hash. Then finally, we can return the object. So the user is going to be this.userService. We want to call to save user and pass in the user. We're also going to pass in the access token and the refresh token. All right, so the reason why we have one shared method here, let's fix the formatting, because Google and GitHub are both going to boil down to get an email, a name, and a profile ID. So that's what we have here. Now, the next step is for us to be updating, or for us to update the authentication controller. Okay, so this auth controller we are going to be updating is going to have the Google and also the Google callback methods. So let's come into the auth controller. We are going to be missing the imports initially, and then we're going to update to bring in a different import. So after this me endpoint here, we are going to have the Google endpoint. So this is a GET request to Google. So /auth/Google. We are going to have this Google auth handler. The response is going to be of type response. And let's have our state. So remember this.auth service.generate state. And then we're going to store this in the response cookie. So response.cookie is going to be this OAuth state cookie. We're going to pass in the state, and the options is HTTP only is going to be true. We're also going to have secure, which is this.config service.get. The node env is equals to production. So this is Boolean. Same site is going to be lax, and the max age here is going to be 5.60 times 100. And then we can go on to have the authorization URL, which is going to be equals to this.googleauth service.get authorization URL based on this state. And now we can redirect the user to the authorization URL like this. Okay, so we are going to bring in the Google Auth service later. Let's have the Google callback route. And this is going to be async Google callback, and the code is going to be retrieved from the query. So it's going to be of type string. The state also is going to be retrieved from the query, and it's going to be of type string. The request is going to be of type request, and the response is going to be of type response from express. In here, we're going to have the cookie state. So this is going to be request.cookies as this object here, where we have the record string key and the value is a string. Or we're going to have undefined, and then we're going to call .oauth state cookie like this. And we want to call the response.clear cookie, where we're going to pass in the OAuth state cookie. Also, the front end URL is going to come from our configuration service. So remember, we set this to port 3001. So this.config service, we want to get or throw this string of front end URL. And if there is no state, and also no code and no cookie state, or the state is not equal to the cookie state, then we want to redirect the user to the front end URL, and the path is going to be, let's say, /auth/callback with this error here that we have an invalid OAuth state, and want to go on to return. Then we're going to have the actual try and catch block. So here, the Google Access Token is where we're going to exchange the code for session. So we're going to await this.googleauth service, and we're going to call .exchange code for session, where we pass in the code, and the profile is going to be const profile, where we await this.googleauth service.fetch profile, and we're going to pass in the Google Access Token. So next we're going to have our result. So we're going to say const result, and the result is equals to await this.auth service.login with OAuth profile, and we're going to pass in the object. So remember, it needs the email, which is the profile.email. It also needs the name, which is the profile.name, and the avatar URL is the profile.avatar URL, and the Google ID. So we are going on to log in with the OAuth profile after we have gotten the access token and also gotten the user profile based on the access token. Then we can go on to say this.setAuth cookies, the response, the result.access token, and the result.refresh token. And finally, we can go on to redirect the user to the front end URL /auth/callback. For now, we do not have any front end application, but we're just going to redirect. And in the catch block, we're also going to redirect the user to the front end URL. And this is going to be /auth/callback, and the error param is going to be equal to Google Authentication failed. Now let's have this private setAuth cookie method here. And here we're going to have the response from express. Access token is going to be of type string. Refresh token also is going to be of type string. This function is going to return void. Let's check if we're in production by checking the config service. We want to get node_env. We want to check if it's equals to production, just like this. And we're going to set the response.cookie. So we want to set the cookie in the access token, which is going to be the value of the access token. HTTP only is going to be true. Secure is going to be production. Same site is going to be lax, and now the maximum age is going to be 15 times 60 times 1000, which is 15 minutes. Then finally, for the refresh token, we're going to set this in the cookie, the value refresh token, and we're also going to set HTTP to true. Secure is going to be if we are in production. Same site is going to be lax, and the maximum age is going to be 7 times 24 times 60 times 60 times 1000, which is 7 days for the refresh token. Okay, so definitely we have lots of errors here because we are missing import. We're also missing definition. I'm going to start with the definition of the OAuth state cookie over here. So right somewhere at the top, we are going to have the OAuth state cookie constant. So const OAuth state cookie is just going to be equals to the Google OAuth state. So remember, this is the state that we set in the cookie. Then let's come further down in the constructor here. We need to inject the Google Auth service and the config service. So we're going to bring this 2 more times, and I'll change this to Google Auth service. And this is going to be of type the Google Auth service. So we need to import this. Same for the config service. This is then going to be coming in from Nest.js config package. So this package over here, make sure I bring in the imports. And I'm just going to remove one E over here. Now let's bring in response from Express. Sorry for Nest common. Why do we have the error there despite beginning response? So I think it's Visual Studio Code doing its thing again. So I'm going to refresh soon and see if it continues. But let's continue. Let's bring in query from Nest.js common. And I'll also bring in request from Next.js common, and the error continues for me. Okay, so property cookies does not exist on type request, and redirect does not. All right, so I think it's a VS Code thing that's happening as before, but I'll fix this lint over here. And what I'm gonna do, just as I did previously, I'm just going to refresh my VS Code. Okay, so I saved it, and I'll say Shift Command P, reload window. And once it reloads, I do not expect the errors to still be there. So actually it's done and the errors are still there. And this can point only to one thing. The fact that the request object is not coming in from Express. So right at the top, yeah, that's the reason why. So somewhere around here, we need to bring in the type of request and response from Express. I'm going to be importing type this object, and this is going to be coming in from Express. So what I want to import, I want to bring in the 2 types, so which is the request and also the response, just like this, and the errors should be gone. Now we see the errors are both gone, and cool. So these are the different methods we have. We have this for Google, we have this for the Google callback. This is how it works, and we then have the private method. But that's not all we are going to do. We also need to make sure we register this in the authentication module, because we haven't registered the Google Auth service yet in the auth module, right? So we need to make sure we do that before we continue. So let's come over to the auth module, and here just after the access token guard, I'm going to have the Google Auth service. And this is pretty much everything. Now we are missing the Google Client ID and also the callback URL. But before we go over to Google Cloud, let's make sure application can still come up and running. And once we verify everything is running, we are going to go on to Google Cloud Console, get the credentials, and make sure that we can now authenticate with Google OAuth, and then we can proceed to GitHub. Now we are going to come over to console.cloud.google.com so that we can register or create a new project. So click over here, and you want to click on new project so that you can give this project a name and configure the project. So I'm going to name this project the name of our application. So something like Nest.js auth, like this. This is just for internal use. I'm going to click on create, and I'm just going to select the billing account over here. You might not need to select any billing account. So now you can see we have this spinner over here, which is creating the project, and we're going to wait. Now that this is done, let's navigate into this project. All right, so now we are here. You can see we are in this Nest Auth project. You can either come to the APIs and services, or over here, you can see API and services, and let's select the OAuth consent screen. Now we are going to be redirected to the overview page so that we can set up the project. So this is auth overview. Click on get started. The application name is the name that is asking the user for consent. So I'm going to go with Nest.js auth, select my email, and this is for external use. So this is going to be available for anyone with a user account, but we need to set up test users, which we are going to do in a moment so that this can work. Now for the contact information, this is where you want to type out your email. So as you can see, this is where Google is going to notify you about changes in your project, and you want to go on and finish and create. Once you're done with the project configuration, we're going to need to create an OAuth client. So click on this create OAuth client, and over here, give this a moment. You need to select your application type, a web application. And the name, you can just leave the default here, is just for the console. It's not related to what the end user will see. For the authorized JavaScript origin, we are going to paste in the port 3000 and also port 3001. If you deploy application, this is going to be the front end and back end endpoint. For the redirect URL, this is going to be /auth/google/callback, so our API. Then you can hit create. This is our client ID. So we're going to copy over this client ID and make sure we register this in our env. So we're going to come over to the env file, and right here we're going to paste in the Google client ID. Let's come back for the client secret. Make sure you copy this, and then we're going to head back to our application, and we're going to paste in the client secret just here like this. So we have been able to register the credentials. We're going to click OK. All right, so now we are done with this. The next thing we're going to do is to come over to Postman so that we can test things out. But before we do, I just want to give us a breakthrough of our application. You see over here in the auth controller, we have this route that goes over to /Google so that you can understand the flow. This is calling the Google Auth service to get the authorization URL. In this authorization URL, if we go to the definition, you can see we get the client ID and the callback that we just registered. We are going to pass this over to Google via the params. That's where we inject this. And then we are going to be redirected to this callback URL. This Google callback URL is then passed as params. If we check the .env file, you can see this is going to be /auth/google/callback. Automatically, Google is going to redirect us back here. That route has been registered in the auth controller and passed in here as params. If you come to the auth controller, you can see we have this /auth/google/callback endpoint, and we're going to get the code and the state from the as query, so making up the query decorator. And over here, you can see we have the front end URL. We do some validation, but most importantly, we go into log with OAuth profile and we set the cookie. And you can see we are setting the access token and the refresh token with the response cookie here, and we redirect the user over to the front end URL. So now that we understand how things are working, let's give this a trial. Here in the browser, we need to go over to port 3000 just to verify everything is up and running. Then we go over to /auth/Google. All right, so let's send this off. But before we do, actually, we need to register our test user. So back here, let's come over to audience, and in audience, we need to set our add users so that you can have the user you will test this with. So I'm going to register my email over here, which is the same email I used for this. And I'm going to give this a save. Now you have the test user. You can go on to send the request to this endpoint. So let's go on and send this off, and we can see missing required parameter client ID. Now, this is just because we forgot to shut down and restart our application after making change to our env. So open up your application, make sure you stop your terminal and just restart, and that is going to fix the error that we just saw on the screen. So once the application is up and running, we can then come back to the browser and send this request again. And now you see we are redirected over to the Google OAuth flow. This is the application NestJS auth. You want to select your user profile over here. And next you need to give permission to the scope. So you're going to hit on continue. And you will see we're going to be redirected to the front end URL, which is on port 3001 /auth/Google, which we do not have yet. So we say this site cannot be reached, and this is the front end URL. If you inspect here and you go over to the application. So this is under application, and you come over to cookie. You see here we have the access and the refresh token. You can just ignore others, they are not related to this application. So you see we have the access token and the refresh token. That means we can use this token to send the request over to our API. Also, if we check Neon, you're going to see here in the users, just give this a refresh, we are going to have a new user. This user is going to have the Google ID. As you can see, this is my user with the email, the Google ID, no password hash, no GitHub ID. We have the avatar URL, but we have the hash for the reset token and also the access token. Okay, so what we're going to do, let's copy this access token. We're going to use it right now in Postman. So over here in Postman, let's have the URL. So this is the me endpoint, is a GET request, but we need to set the authorization headers with that token. So over here in authorization, this is going to be the bearer token, and we just need to update this with this value over here that we copied, and then we can go on to send a request to this endpoint, and we're going to see over here, we're going to have these user credentials. So give this a moment, and now you see this is working as expected. Now let's go on and implement a GitHub auth. Okay everyone, let's implement the GitHub authentication. So now I'm going to close here, and just as we did for Google, we are going to be creating the new file, which is the GitHub auth service file, and this file is going to look somewhat identical to what we just did for Google. So now, so let's close this up, and let's start by bringing in injectable, which is going to come from at NestJS common. We also need to bring in our configuration service. The config service is going to come from at NestJS /config. We also need to bring in random bytes. Random bytes is going to come in from node::crypto. Now these are the imports we need. Let's have the different types. We're going to start with the type of GitHub profile. So export type GitHub profile is going to take the GitHub ID of type string. We're also going to expect the email of type string. We also expect the name. The name is going to be string, and just as the Google, the avatar URL is going to be optional string like this. The next type we're going to have is the GitHub token response. So this type is going to be the access token, which is optional string, or it could be an error because either we have the access token or defined, or we have error undefined, which is going to be a string. The next type is the GitHub user response. So the type GitHub user response, we are going to have the ID number. We're also going to have the login string. You can add console.logs and you're going to see these types. We also have the email, which is string or null. Sorry, the name, and after the name, the email. So both the name and the email are string or null, but the avatar underscore URL is going to be a string, optional string. Now we have the GitHub email response because we're going to send a separate response for the email. So GitHub email response, we're going to have the email, which is a string. We're also going to have primary, which is Boolean to know if it's the primary email, and verified is going to be Boolean to know if the email is verified. We are going to be marking the class as injectable. The GitHub auth service, we're going to register it later in the app module, in the auth module. So this GitHub auth service, in the constructor, we are going to inject the configuration service. So private read-only config service is of type config service. We're also going to have the generate state method, which is going to return a string. We're just going to call random byte from crypto 32 and to string hex. Now let's have the methods to get the authorization URL. This is going to take in the state string and it's going to return a string. From the config service, we are going to retrieve the client ID. So we say this.config service.get or throw the string of GitHub client ID, and then the same for the callback URL. So the callback URL is going to be this.config service. We want to get or throw where we expect the string, and this is going to be the GitHub callback URL. All right, so we have this. Now let's construct the params. So identical just as we did for Google. The params is going to be new set params, the client ID, which is going to point to client ID from our config. The redirect URI is going to be the callback URL also from the config. And the scope, we want to read the user and also want to read the email, and we're going to pass in the state. Now we know we're going to inject this parent via query parameters to this GitHub URL. So https github.com/login/OAuth/authorized, and we're going to pass the param to string like this. Then we want to exchange the code for access token. Async exchange code for access token. We need the code we want to exchange, and then we're going to return a string promise. And also we're going to get the client ID and secret from the config. So these are config service.get or throw string with the key of GitHub client ID. The same for the client secret. We're going to get this from Google in a moment. Sorry, from GitHub. The client secret is this.config service.get or throw the string with the key of GitHub client secret. Let's also retrieve the callback URL so that we can use fetch and redirect. So we're going to have the callback URL. This is going to be the config service.get or throw the string and with the key of GitHub callback URL. So then we're going to make use of fetch to get a response. So const response is equals to await fetch, and the URL is the github.com/login/OAuth/access_token. For the configuration, the method is going to be a post request, and these headers we're going to set here is going to take in the content type header, and we're going to pass application x www form URL encoded. We're also going to accept application JSON in the headers. And then the body is going to be this new set parameters so that we can pass in the code that this function will receive. We are also going to pass in the client ID, which is the client ID from the env. Same for the client secret, which is going to come from the env, and the redirect URI is going to be called automatically for us via GitHub. Okay, so we're also going to pass it here, which is the callback URL. So let's close this off, and we're going to check if the response isn't okay. So maybe we're not able to exchange the GitHub authorization code. The error we're going to throw is going to say failed to exchange GitHub authorization code. But if everything is okay and it works out, then we are going to get the data. So data is going to be equals to await response.json, and we're going to cast it as the GitHub token response. So if this data doesn't have the access token, then want to throw a new error because the token is missing from the response. So we're going to throw new error data.error. As a fallback, we're going to say GitHub token response is missing the access token. But if everything is fine and good, we can then go on to return the data.access token. Now we're going to use this access token to fetch the user profile. So let's do that. We're going to close this, and the next method is async fetch profile, which is going to take in a GitHub access token string and is going to return a promise that resolves to GitHub profile. We're going to have the user response by awaiting fetch, and this is going to go to GitHub, so api.github.com/user, and in the headers we're going to have the authorization, and we're going to have the bearer token. So we're going to inject the token in the headers. And also we're going to accept this application type and the application /vnd.github+json. And then we can close this up. So let's do our check. If the user response is not okay, then we are going to throw this error that we failed to fetch the GitHub profile. But if it's okay, let's get the user. So we're going to say const user is equals to await the user response.json as the GitHub user response. Then we can let the email or initialize the email here, which is going to be equals to user.email. But if for some reason the email is not there, it happens with GitHub. We are going to call or make a request to await this.verified primary email. We want to fetch this verified primary email, making use of the GitHub access token. So we're going to implement this method in a moment. And also, if for some reason we still do not have the email, then we can go on to throw an error that the GitHub account doesn't have a verified email address. Just like this. And then we can go on to finally return, and we're going to return this object because everything is good. So the GitHub ID is going to be casted to string, the user.id. We're also going to return the email, the name, which is the user.name. Otherwise, we'll just fall back to the user.login. and the avatar URL is going to be the user.avatar URL. Now let's implement the fetch verified primary email method. So it's this private async method here, which is going to take in the GitHub Access Token string. And now we are going to expect a promise that resolves to a string or undefined, which might give us some warnings later. So the response is awaiting fetch, and the URL is api.github.com/user/emails. For the configuration headers, we are going to have the authorization key just as we did before. So this is going to be the bearer token, and also the accept type here is going to be the application /vnd.github+json. We're going to close all of these, and let's check if the response is not okay. Then we're just going to return undefined. And if it's okay, let's go on to have the email. So we're going to say const emails is going to be equals to await response.json as the GitHub email response, but we'll need the verify email here. So since this is a list here, we're going to find, so primary email or primary verified is equals to emails.find. We are going to have each email entry, and we're going to check the entry.primary and also the entry.verified. If after this check and we find the primary verified email, then we're just going to return the primary verified email. But if after this we still do not find, we just want to get anyone that is verified that is still not primary. So we're going to say const any verified is equals to emails.find, where we have the entry, and we're just going to return the entry.verified. And finally, we can just go on to return any verified, which could be undefined.email like this. So I'm going to close this up, and now because we are returning undefined here, we now have a linting error over here, or a TypeScript error, because this email you can see could be string or no, string or undefined. What we're going to do here, we're just going to cast this to of type string so that TypeScript is happy. And that should fix the error here. Then we're going to fix the linting error, and we can then proceed over to the authentication controller. So over here, this is the GitHub service. So let's come to the auth controller, and we need to register the endpoint for GitHub just as we did for Google. So this first here is get GitHub, so /auth/GitHub over here is going to come to this route handler. And here we're going to have the GitHub auth. We're going to get the response of type response, and we're going to return void. So first we're going to get the state. State is equals to this.GitHub auth service.generate state. And we want to set the cookie. So we're going to say response.cookie, the GitHub state cookie. And the state and the options, HTTP only is going to be true. We're also going to set secure, which is going to be this.config service.get, the node env, if this is equals to production. We're also going to have same site lax, and the maximum age is going to be 5 times 60 times 100. We also have the authorization, times 1000. We also have the authorization URL, which is the this.github service.get authorization URL, and we're going to pass in the state. Then we can redirect the user to that authorization URL. So we have gone through this flow in the GitHub. The user is going to come over here to this authorization URL, which is then going to point to this get GitHub callback. So once the user is here, we're going to have the GitHub callback route handler. We're going to retrieve the code, making use of the query decorator. The code is of type string. We're also going to retrieve the state, making use of the query decorator. The state is of type string. Also the request object, making use of the request decorator of type request, and the response is also of type response, and we're going to return promise void. So let's have the cookie state. This is going to be equal to rec.cookies as the record string key, and the value is a string or undefined. And then we're going to have the GitHub state cookie. So we're going to clear this from the cookie response.clear cookie, the GitHub state cookie like this, and we want to get the front end URL. So const front end URL is equals to this.config service. We want to get or throw with the key of front end URL, and we expect to get back a string. And then we're going to have our validation. Let's have our check. If we do not find a code, if we do not have a state, if we do not have a cookie state, Or if the state is not equals to cookie state, then we're just going to return or redirect user to the front end and say the auth callback error that there is an invalid authentication state, OAuth state here, and we're just going to return. Now we're just going to go and have our try catch block. In the try block, we're going to have the GitHub Access Token by making a call to the GitHub Auth service, and we're going to exchange the code that we have. We're going to exchange this code for the access token. Then we're going to say const profile, and profile is going to be equals to await this .github auth service, and we're going to call .fetch profile, and we're going to pass in the GitHub access token over here. All right, so let's check our results. We're going to say const result is going to be equals to await this .auth service .login with OAuth profile. So you can see we're using this, but this time around the email is the user.email, and the name is going to be the profile.name, and also the avatar URL is going to be the profile.avatar URL, and the GitHub ID is going to be the profile.github ID. The next thing we're going to do is just set the cookie. So we're going to set the cookie by saying this.set of cookies, where we pass in the response, the result.access token, and the results.refresh token. And then finally, we can redirect the user to the front end. So we're going to say response.redirect to the front end URL /auth/callback. And in the catch block, we're going to redirect the user to the front end URL, but we know that something is wrong if the user is in the catch block. So this is going to be /auth/callback on the error that the GitHub auth failed, and we can close this up like this. So definitely lots of errors because we are not bringing in the import, and we're also missing the definition right at the top. So at the top here, we're going to have the GitHub state cookie definition. Const GitHub state cookie is going to be equals to GitHub OAuth state. So maybe the first time we can rename to Google state cookie, but no worries, let's continue. In the controller, let's not forget to also have the GitHub auth service in the controller. I'll just duplicate the Google and I'll rename this to GitHub auth service, which is going to be of type the GitHub auth service like this. So we can come further down. Let's see what we are missing, and this should just be a lint error over here as we have all the imports. Yeah, this is a lint error. We're just going to fix this over here like this. All right, so this is the controller with the two routes. We can then make sure we register this in the app module. So we're going to register the GitHub auth service right in here. So GitHub auth service, and I'm going to format this. Now the next step, let's head over to GitHub. Let's get the credentials, and let's go on to test that GitHub OAuth works in our application. You'll need to come over to your GitHub user profile, and let's come over to the settings. Over here in the settings page, you want to look for your developer settings. So down here where you have developer settings, you want to select this option, which then brings you to this dashboard where you can create OAuth applications. So we are going to be creating a new OAuth application right in here. The application name, I'm also going to go with Nest.js auth as the name of the application, and I'm just going to add hyphen just here. The homepage URL is going to be the API URL. So this is your API URL port 3001. The description is optional, but the callback URL is going to be your API. Sorry, the homepage is your front end, but the callback URL is /auth/github/callback. All right, so copy your client ID, come over to the application, and you want to come over to the .env, and you want to paste this in right here for the value of the GitHub client ID. The same for the GitHub client secret. Back to the browser. Here you want to create a new client secret. Then you're going to authenticate yourself, go to the auth flow, and now you have your client secret. I'm going to copy this back to the application. I'm going to register this here as the value for the client secret. You also see here the GitHub callback URL is /auth/github/callback. So let's give this file a save. And I'm just going to exit out of the env. I want to make sure I quit the dev server this time around, and also make sure I restart it to pick up the latest changes that we made in the .env. So I'll clear and I'm going to run the start dev command again. Just give this a moment for the application to come back up and running. And then once it's up and running, we can go on to testing. So just wait a moment. Now it's up and running. Let's come over to the browser. We are going to go over to /auth/GitHub. We know this is the endpoint for our API. And I'm just going to send this request before I check the cookie. So I'm going to send this and you want to click on authorize laribright. So your username. Now you see we are in the OAuth flow. And once this authorization is complete, we are going to be redirected to the front end URL, which for now doesn't exist. So we get site can't be reached. But now you see we have /auth/callback. If we inspect this time around, and if we come over to the application, and in application, we click in the cookies for localhost port 3001, so the front end cookie, you see here we have the access token and the refresh token. You can just ignore others. So I'm going to copy this here, and then I'm going to come over to Postman so that we can test this. And we know the only change we need to make here is in the token, because here we have the bearer token. So let's update the token to point to the token we just copied. I'm going to paste this here, and if you send out this request, you're going to see we are going to have the laribright user. So as you can see, we have laribright user here, the GitHub credentials. We can also verify if we come over to our database. So here, if we come to the Neon console and you inspect your Postgres database, if you refresh the users table, you will see you have a new user here with the credentials for the GitHub user. So that's why here we have the password hash to be null, but the GitHub ID is this, and we also have other properties here like this. All right, so we have tested this. This is working as expected. We just have one more to go and implement, and that is the reset password functionality, making use of Resend. Let's work on that next. Now we are working on our forgot password flow, our forgot and also reset password flow. So it's important to have that in mind. So let's close all, and we are going to start by creating the mail service. So right in the auth, we are going to be creating the mail service.ts file, just right here. And yeah, so we're going to start by, as always, importing injectable, which will come from Nest.js command. We also need to import the configuration service. So let's import the config service. The config service is going to come from at nestjs/config. We also need to bring in Resend. Resend is the mailing client we're going to use to send the actual mail. This is going to come from Resend. And then we can mark the class as injectable and go on to have the class definition. So export class mail service. We're going to have private read-only Resend is of type Resend. And in the constructor, we want to initialize Resend and also inject the config service. So here we're going to say private read-only config service is going to be of type config service, just like this. And in the constructor, we are going to initialize Resend. So this Resend is going to be new Resend client, and we're going to get the API key, making use of the config service. So just like this over here. Once we have this initialized here, we then need to have the different method, starting with this send password reset email. So it's going to take in 2, which is the recipient, and the reset URL, which is of type string, and it's going to return promise void. So in here, we're going to get the email from the config service. So we're going to double check this in a moment. So we're going to get or throw the string with the key of email from, and finally we can send the email. We're going to await this .resend.emails.send, and we're going to have from. The from is this from over here from the config service. The 2 is the recipient that this method is going to receive. The subject is reset your password, and the actual HTML, we're going to have this paragraph, actually 3 paragraph, which is going to say we received a request to reset your password. And you also want to have the link. So in this paragraph, we're going to have this anchor tag with a href that goes to the reset URL. And we're going to say click here to reset your password. You always want to have this warning here, or this information that's going to say this link expires in 15 minutes. If you didn't request this, you can go on to ignore this email. Just something like this you can send across to the user. And this is pretty much it for the mailing service. Later on, we're going to register this in the auth module. But the next thing to do is to create the different DTOs, because the user would need to send across their email for the forgot password. But this email form, as I said, we should double check. So if you come over to the env just here, you're going to see this should be onboarding at resend.dev. So it should be this. All right. So now let's go and create the DTOs. Still in the auth DTO folder, we're going to be creating the forgot password DTO file, just like this over here. So to reset your password, you need to tell us that you forgot the password, right? So we're going to bring in his email, which will come in from class validator. So we just need your email saying, hey, I forgot my password. So we're going to be exporting the class, the forgot password DTO. And here we need at his email decorator, and we have the email, which is of type string. Now we need the same DTO, which is going to be for the actual reset password. So this told us they forgot the password. We are going to set them the reset password DTO. So this is what we require. So we're going to be importing a string and min length, which will come from class validator. And for them to actually reset their password, they need to give us back the token and the new password. So we're going to be exporting the class reset password DTO and is string for the token, which is required. And also we need at a string, and we need a minimum length of 8 for the new password. So remember, that is our password validation. So new password is going to be of type string. Now we just need to register one method in our user service, which is going to help us to find the password by this reset password token hash. So let's look for the users. Yeah, so this over here, the user service. And maybe I'm going to implement this somewhere around here, just between the reset password and the to save user method. So right in here, we're going to have this async method, find by password reset token hash, which is going to take in the actual reset or password reset token hash of type string. I'm going to fix the formatting once this is done. So we expect to get the user, or we get undefined. Then we need to make a call to our database. So const user is equals to our this.db, and we want to select everything from the users table. For the where clause, we're going to say where equals the users.password reset token hash is going to match the password reset token hash that this method is going to receive. We're going to have a limit of 1, and finally we want to return the user. So this is the user service. Now we're going to make some changes in the authentication service just after I fix this linting here. So I'm just going to select one of these and fix the linting. Let the IDE help fix the linting. All right, so now this is in the user service. We need to also make a change in the authentication service, so that we can have the mail service and all of those. So right here, we are going to make some changes, and we're going to start in a constructor so that we can inject the mail service. We're going to say private read only. The mail service is going to be of type mail service, and mail service should be imported from the mail service file. I'm going to fix this typo, and I also fix this linting that we have over here. And we are going to bring in a couple of imports. Okay, so let's go and import random bytes and also create hash. These imports are going to be coming in from Node crypto library package. Then we need to bring in 3 types, or 2 types. We're going to bring in the forgot password DTO, and this is going to come from the DTO folder. We also need to bring in the type of the reset password DTO, which also is going to be coming in from the DTO folder. And then we just have the file that we just created, the reset password file. Okay, so this is pretty much it for the imports. I think we are good here, and then we can continue with the auth service. Okay, so we're going to come somewhere down. We want to have the hash reset token, which is going to help us to hash the reset token. and the two method for forgot password and also reset password. So maybe somewhere around here, maybe just after this login with OAuth profile, we're going to have this private method to hash the reset token. So here, private hash reset token is going to take in the raw token of type string. It's going to return a string, and we just want to go on and create hash, which is going to be the SHA-256. And then we're going to have an update row from the raw token, and we're going to have the digest hex like this. Then we want to have this async forgot password method, which takes in the DTO of type forgot password DTO, and we expect a promise that is just this object with success true. So we always want to return this generic here, whether it works or not. So the email, remember we always have to normalize the email. So we call the DTO.email. The user is also going to be found from the user service. So we're going to await this.user service.find by email, where we pass in the actual user email. If we do not, or if we have a user, then we're going to check the raw token. So we're going to get random bytes 32 to string hex like this, because we want to send the email to the user to reset their password. We're also going to have the token hash. So we're going to call this.reset token hash, and we're going to pass in the raw token. And then we want to also set the expiry time. Remember, this expires in 15 minutes. So it expires in a new date, now plus 15 times 60 times 1000. And now we're going to set this password token hash. So we're going to call this.user service.set password reset token, which is going to take in the user ID, the token hash, and also the expires at. So we are going to send all of these or set this in the database for the user so that we can check this when the user clicks on the link. So the reset base URL is going to be gotten from the config service. So we're going to get or throw, where we expect a string. The key is the reset password URL. And then we're going to say const the reset URL is equals to the reset base URL. And the token param is going to be the raw token like this. Now, finally, we're going to send this to the user. So await this.mail service.send password reset email. And we're going to pass in the user.email and also the reset URL. Now, we always want to return true, okay? Whether or not the email exists. We're going to return success true like this. We're not going to give the user any hint. Then we're going to have the actual reset password method, which is going to take in the DTO for the reset password DTO. So this is when the user has clicked on the link. We're also going to return the same generic response. And first we get the token hash. So we're going to get this.hash reset token. We're going to pass in a DTA.token. So const user is going to be equal to await this.user service. We're going to call .find by password reset token hash and pass the actual token hash over here. So let's have our checks, our if check. We're going to check if we do not have a user, or if there is no user.password reset token hash expires at. So now you can see we are finding by the reset password token hash that we did in the previous step, okay? Or if the user.password reset token expires at. So we want to call .getTime. If this is less than the date.now, we just want to throw the new error that, hey, this has either, or this is in the either invalid or this is expired, okay? Just like this. So let's go on to then have the password hash. So const password hash is going to be equal to argon2.hash, where we can then hash the new password for the user. We're also going to go on and reset the password. So we're going to await this.user service.reset password, where we reset password for this user with this ID, and we want to set the password hash here. And finally, we can go on to just return success true like this. Okay, so our auth service and the user service, they are ready. I'm going to format this and then we can go over to the controller, okay? So let me quickly format this linting that we have over here and we are good to go. So we have these two methods. Now we're going to come over to the controller so that we can go on to register the two endpoints. So let's come here and in the auth controller, so maybe we can do this before the set token, so just after the GitHub callback. Somewhere here I think is okay. Let's have this post request, which is forgot password, just like this. We're going to have the HTTP status of OK. We always want to return OK. And then we're going to have the async forgot password. This is going to take in the DTO, making use of the body decorator. And this is going to be of type forgot password DTO. And it's going to return the same success true like this. We're just going to return this.userService.forgot password. And we're going to pass in that DTO. All right, so all that is left is just the same for the reset password. A same post request, and this is going to have the HTTP code where the status is OK. And we're going to have the async reset password. And the body, we're going to have the DTO, which is of type reset password DTO. And this is going to return a promise of success true just like this. And finally, we can go on to return this.auth service.reset password, and we pass in the DTO. All right, so this is what we have, but we are not done yet. We need to fix the linting. We also need to make sure we import the different DTOs. So let's import the forgot password DTO, and let's also import the reset password DTO. All right, so we're going to head over to the auth module so that we can register the mail service in the provider. So here in the auth module, in the providers, you want to have a new provider, which is the mail service. Okay, so this has been done over here. This is cool. This is working. We are going to double check the .env just to make sure that over in the .env, we have the reset password URL, which is set to the front end endpoint. And then, we have set this already, but I'm just going to double check. We can now proceed to testing this out. Now is the time for us to test out our reset password and forgot password functionality. You can see over here the password reset URL is the front end /reset password. So you want to make sure you have this set already. And then you also want to make sure things are up and running. I'm going to close all these tabs we have open. I'm just going to double check my terminal. Yes, it's up. And then we're going to come over to Postman. Here in Postman, we need to register a new request. So the way it works, we're going to first of all tell our API we have forgotten our password, and then the API is going to send us a link to reset our password. So over here, we're going to have a new request URL. So this is going to be /auth, and the endpoint is forgot-password, which is a post request. So let's update this. And the request body, we are going to be setting things up. So let's go over to the body, and raw JSON, we are going to be sending the user email. So this just needs the user email. So I'm going to go with my test@test.com email over here. Actually, this isn't going to work if we try to send this, and that's because we need to use the same email we used to register in our Resend. So I'm going to be replacing this with my email, but first I need to create an account. So I'm going to come over to register, and I'm going to try to register with the same email I used to create my Resend account. This is just the use case until you have your own domain in Resend. So 129, and the name, I'm just going to change things up like this, and I'm going to go on to send this. Actually, this isn't going to work. And the reason why it's not going to work is because I already used this for my Google authentication. So I'm going to come over to the database just to delete this user here with this same email to free up the space for our registration. So back in Postman, I'm going to send this again, and now the registration should go. So remember, the password is 129 over here. So now we have this new user, and I'm going to use this user to test the reset password functionality. So I'll copy the email, and then I'm going to come back to this where we had this previously, and I'm just going to update the email. Now, if we go on to send this, we are going to get success 200, but the only way for us to know is to check our email. So now we see success, and I'm going to come over to the browser so we can check our mailbox. So now you see here, we have this email, auth tutorial, and reset your password. If we click into here, we see the message. You will receive the password reset or a request to reset your password. And if you hover on the link, you can see here in the bottom left the token, and it takes us to our front end URL. So we click into it. Definitely we do not have the front end, but we can copy the token from the URL. And with this token, we can then head back to Postman. So here in Postman, we need to go over to a new endpoint, which is the actual reset password. So I'll click here and I'll update this to be reset password. So /auth/reset-password is a post request. We have the body, raw, JSON, and this just needs the token and the new password. So the token, I'm going to paste in the token here, and then the new password, I'm going to just change things up a little bit. So the new password, this is our DTO that we did set up. So I'm going to go with something, let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, and let's say 6, 7, 8, 9, just to mix things up. So I'm going to copy this. And now if we send this, we are still going to get success. We do not want to give the user a hint. So I'm also going to say success. Hey, this was successful. Now let's try to log in. We're going to come here and let's try to log in with the old password. So this is the Bright lari 2 user credentials. I'm going to use this here. And I'm going to try to log in. Actually, the password has changed, because if we go here, we can see that the password is now 1 to 9 like this. So I'm going to use the previous password. And then if I give this a send, you can see now we still get invalid email or password. So in the password field, I'm just going to paste this in here. So the new password, and let's try to log in with this new password. And now you're going to see this is working as expected. We get these user credentials and authentication works. So this is the last feature of our implementation for Nest.js authentication.